Is there a crisis at the US border right now? Well, it depends on who you ask. If you're intelligent and you actually look at the facts and the data, then you'll probably say that yes, there is a crisis. But if you work in the Biden administration, then no. Why would you ever use the C word?
At this point, is this a crisis at the border?
Look, I don't think we need to sit here and put new labels on what we have already conveyed is challenging.
So let's find out what's actually happening at the border right now and why the Biden administration is not doing a good job here. According to BBC, as of March 14th, which was a week ago, there were more than 13,000 unaccompanied children in U.S. custody along the border. Now, however you look at it, 13,000 unaccompanied children, that's a big number, and it kind of sounds like a crisis to me. But the Biden administration kind of refuses to use that word. Thanks to Project Veritas, we actually know what the inside of these facilities look like, and they're not great. These photos show a location where about 3,000 people are being held. And as you can clearly see, they are in enclosed spaces and they're very crowded. There's a lot of people in a very small space. Some of them have mats to sleep on, some of them it looks like maybe don't. And they all seem to have those aluminum foil blanket things that the guy wears in Better Call Saul. So these are not great conditions by any means. And if I had to put a word to this, perhaps it would be kids in cages? Just spitballing here, I'm not sure where that phrase came from, but you know. Now, just based on the things we've seen already, I think most people would argue that, yeah, we do have a crisis at the border, but not if you're CNN. Because to them, it's just a problem that caught the Biden team off guard. It's not really that big a deal. And they kind of try to pivot the blame onto someone else. They say that from its earliest weeks in office, the Biden administration has been playing catch-up, essentially trying to blame the previous administration for what's happening right now. Even though they admit here that Biden administration officials say they expected the number of migrants arriving at the border to swell once they took office. Perhaps not to this extent, but they kind of knew it was going to happen. But that doesn't stop people from once again trying to blame absolutely everything bad on Donald Trump. This is never going to get old for the left. Take, for example, Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary, saying that Trump is to blame for the border crisis because of his evil or inhumane policies or something. Now, it doesn't really help to point fingers and say that Donald Trump is to blame or Joe Biden is to blame, even though Joe Biden is pretty much to blame. If we look, for example, at his message back in December to migrants trying to cross the border, he said, "Don't come now, but help is on the way." The implication there is that you shouldn't cross the border right now, but once I'm in office, I'll help you cross the border. I mean, that's pretty clearly saying don't come across right now, but you can do it later. So this is basically a problem of their own making, especially when you consider the fact that Joe Biden's administration, unlike Donald Trump's, is now allowing unaccompanied minors into the country. So if you tell immigrants or would-be immigrants or migrants that their unaccompanied children are allowed into the country and they shouldn't cross over just yet, but help is on the way, that's kind of saying send everyone over right now as soon as I become president. And that's essentially what we're seeing here. But again, pointing fingers, saying it was Donald Trump or Joe Biden, that's not super helpful, even though it was Joe Biden. We should instead look and see, what are we doing to fix this crisis? Because it is a crisis. The Rio Grande Valley has perhaps a solution, and it's a really bad one. They have decided to release migrants without a court date. We have from Axios that 150 migrants were released last Saturday without giving them any sort of court date, which is unprecedented in recent American history. Now, this policy is in contrast to the already controversial catch and release policy that Donald Trump stopped implementing when he was president. Now, catch and release essentially just means that if someone is trying to cross the US border or they claim asylum or whatever the case may be, you will detain them for a time, but as you're processing their request, you will allow them into the interior of the country with a specific court date. And you tell them that on this day, they have to show up at court and then you'll continue working on the process. Now, there are obviously issues inherent with catch and release, but here we have something even worse. This move is unprecedented because it doesn't make any real sense. You're releasing them without any set court date, which means you have to find them sometime later to tell them about a court date even later. You have to have multiple points of contact just to let them know what's happening with their process. And that doesn't seem very likely to happen, especially when you consider the fact that this same facility, who released 150 migrants without a court date, they currently have 5,100 migrants in custody, even though they're only supposed to have 700 because of COVID restrictions. So they have a lot more people than they can deal with. How do you think they're going to find those who are released into the country? But that's not the only issue with what's happening on the border right now. We see here once again from Axios that contrary to law, nearly 1,000 children are being held in these facilities for more than 10 days. They point out that, according to the law, you can only hold migrants about 72 hours in facilities like this one. However, they point out that as of Saturday, more than 3,000 unaccompanied children had been in custody for longer than 3 days, which is what's legally allowed. More than 2,000 have been held for 5 days, and 800 have been held for more than 10 days. And since so many people continue to cross, that trend is accelerating. They point out that as of Monday, only 185 migrant children had been held for longer than 10 days. But on Saturday of that same week, just a few days later, that number had gone up to 800 children. So it doesn't seem like these numbers are coming down anytime soon, because people keep crossing the border. They keep coming, and Border Patrol, they just don't have the facilities to house them all. Now, at the very least, the Biden administration is being very forthright about all of this. They're being transparent and open to the media and to the American public. No, they're really not doing that. As a matter of fact, they're doing the opposite. We see here from the Hill that the Biden administration has essentially imposed a media blackout on the border and the migrant holding facilities, which, as I pointed out previously, have been known as kids in cages for quite a long time. But now that terminology doesn't really seem to apply, I guess, because it's Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump. They also point out that the administration is restricting information that the Border Patrol can provide to the press. So not only are they housing kids in cages using their own terminology, not only are they using rhetoric that will increase the flow of migrants trying to cross the border, but they're essentially trying to lie about it, pretend that it's not a crisis, and then not let people know what's actually happening at the border. And this is coming from the administration that promised they would be transparent from the get-go.
When the president asked me to serve in this role, we talked about the importance of bringing truth and transparency back to the briefing room. And he asked me to ensure we are communicating about the policies across the Biden-Harris administration.
So I don't see how anyone can objectively look at all of this information, these pictures and the data, and say there's not a crisis at the border, because there clearly is. And recognizing that it is a crisis is important. It's not just semantics. If you say there's a problem at the border, well, a problem can be ignored, but a crisis can't. There has to be a solution. And it doesn't really look like the Biden administration has any real solutions here, because it's not working and things seem to be getting worse by the day. And the hypocrisy by so many on the left is not really surprising, but once again, fairly evident. Just think about how many of them were very adamant that holding kids in cages was this horrible thing. It was an impeachable offense from Donald Trump. But now, a lot of them are being eerily silent about Joe Biden doing effectively the same thing. Now, I'm not going to say that they're all hypocrites, because some of them are being vocal about it, but not nearly as many as were vocal during the Trump administration. And I, for one, am anxiously awaiting AOC going back to the border to once again cry at a parking lot, because I suppose we have kids in cages just like we did then. So there you have it. We do have a crisis on the U.S. border. And I don't know what the best solution is, but I do know that Joe Biden just letting people into the country is not a great idea. And I also know that telling migrant children they can come in essentially unopposed is a great way to increase the number of people who are smuggling children across the border, which is not good for anybody. So, whatever they're doing, it's not working, and they should probably change their policies. But what are your thoughts about all of this and the crisis on the border? Go ahead and let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you for watching, sharing, subscribing, and I'll see you next time.